Kat, great to see you. How are you?
I'm living the dream. How are you?
I'm great. Yeah, this conversation, you and I were catching up a few weeks ago. We were talking about how crazy the world had gotten in the market, and I think it's gotten crazier since then. So very timely, very timely. And I wanted to, I wanted to really have a conversation about leadership, people, teams, culture. I mean, this is such a crazy time for our founders and CEOs and really folks that are running companies everywhere, trying to read the economy and geopolitics and crazy news every day. And are we having a recession? Are we not having a recession? People are trying to deal with their kids going back to school. What else? Global warming. I mean, how long is that list? So thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I thought it'd be helpful just maybe at the start, just give folks a little bit of your background and sort of how you got to where you are today. And we'll talk a little about your amazing current job.
Yeah. I grew up a child of a single parent. I'm the oldest of three girls, helped raise my two sisters, had to start working in the service industry like many people to save for college and pay bills. First person in my family to get into college. Then I dropped out of college because I was traveling so much around the world, opening franchises as a 19-year-old, that I was failing college. And I moved up in that company, which was Hooters. And by the time I was 26, I was one of the vice presidents of the company. We were doing about 800 million in revenue in 33 countries.
Unreal.
And we're fully vertically integrated. And so while it was Hooters, which makes things kind of interesting or intriguing or even laughable in some ways, what a school to attend, given that we owned our supply chain, we owned our merchandising company, we owned our own DSD network for our restaurants. We were 1/3 company owned, so I had to live and die by my own operations, and 2/3 franchised around the world. So I had to lead through influence instead of command and control. Plus, of course, at a time, it was an iconic brand. So a lot of branding education, operations education, and omni-channel education. And so I was there for about 14 years, then was recruited to come be the president of Cinnabon, took over that brand at the heart of the recession, which was particularly challenging for a business based in malls and airports. And, in that role, two things were true. One, I inherited a truly iconic brand with a lot of love and nostalgia and incredible awareness. That is what most businesses beg for, yet completely broken business model that was borderline irrelevant for where the world and retail and even arguably snacks and food and beverage were going. And so it had a lot to protect and a lot to transform at one time. And I was fortunate to be able to do that in a recession, because it's hard for people to argue that whatever you're doing is not working, and people are pretty desperate for innovation and change. And so I was unfairly advantaged to implement a lot of risks and a lot of change that ended up paying off, turned the business around, had some incredible multiples growth in EBITDA in just a short number of years. Wow. Franchisee success through the roof, 3xing the number of points of distribution in a matter of years, and then used that multi-channel business model, so launching in grocery and alternative channels outside of just brick and mortar franchising, stood up a division in the parent company called Global Channels. And it was like a very weird ego shift for me, going from managing thousands of units and brands that people know and love to working for the parent company, which no one had heard of, with only 2 or 3 employees, but yet which quickly became one of the fastest growing, most meaningful profit contributors to the company. And this new omni-channel division, which was manufacturing, e-commerce, licensing, accelerated our brand connection with consumers because we were in so many other channels so quickly. And so it became a strategic capability of the company. And then I ended up being president and COO of the whole thing, of the parent company, managing billions in sales, thousands of directly operated units and franchise units in 80 countries around the world, and hundreds of thousands of points of retail distribution of our product. 9 presidents reported to me. So a lot of leadership, a lot of change, a lot of challenges. We grew by acquisition, so it was M&A every few years there, and was in that role for 4 years at Focus Brands, which is the parent company, for about 10, and took a year off in 2021 to just focus on advising, board work, angel investing. My husband and I are angel investors in over 70 early stage companies. had the great pleasure of joining a GGVC board with Slice. And now I am running such a special business. In addition to those board roles and that history, I'm the president, COO, and board member of Athletic Greens. Ta-da! One of the fastest growing nutrition companies in the world, with a mission to empower people on their health ownership journey with super comprehensive and convenient foundational nutrition products.
Awesome. I want to come back to AG, but one thing that strikes me as you talk about that journey is, what did you do personally to learn and grow? Because you, like you said, you started at 19, and then I don't know what, 15, 20 years later, you're running this multi-billion-dollar company. But it's not like you went to Harvard Business. I don't think you. So not that Harvard Business School is where everybody should learn to run a company. Yeah. I certainly wouldn't argue that. But what were some tricks and things that you did along the way to get better, to learn, to advance your own skills? One of the things that is so hard about starting and building companies is everybody just expects you go from, we always talk about going from founder to CEO, and everybody expects that you know what you're doing. And so many CEOs say to me, I've never done this before.
Yeah.
So what did you do along the way? I'm just curious, because you had such a meteoric rise, and I'm sure there were points along the way where you too were sort of like, gosh, I've never done this before.
One, I would say, if I look back on the moments of like leveling up and transformation, they were the moments where I've learned to bucket these characteristics into 4 groups of behaviors, or however you want to think about it, personality traits, but always looking to bring forward the optimal mix of humility, curiosity, courage, and confidence. And a few of those 4 may seem in conflict with each other. Like, well, if I'm very humble, that's probably the opposite of being confident and courageous. Not really. So I do want to come back to that throughout, because they are thematic throughout leveling up. But in order to bring those traits forward, to build them, and then to have command over them, I just had to learn to be insanely self-aware. And there are a few ways that I learned to do that. And then also know my audience, and understand what conditions are different now than they were then. And this idea that questions scale, answers don't. And so I may have known the right thing to do in a certain environment with a certain type of team just a year ago, but because of the speed at which the world and markets move, that it's pretty likely some version of that approach is dated, if not directly in conflict with what's optimal. And so learning a methodology and a frequency to reflect, to ask questions, finding questions that scale. So I have a short list of questions that I ask every single stakeholder I talk to in every company I've ever run, of founders that I advise and support. Things like, what's one thing we should stop doing? What's one thing we should start doing? And what's one thing you'd do differently if you were me in my role? And then I have a list of check-in questions where I check in with people who are very important stakeholders, which is not stand-ups, huddles, KPIs, performance conversations, but really checking in. So what's been the best part of the last 30 days? The worst part of the last 30 days, obviously.
Trying to get more personal, it sounds like, is part of it. Yeah.
Like, how are we showing up in the world? And so the crowdsourcing, mapping friction, like what's in your way, what's making your day difficult, what should we stop doing, what should we start doing? That's very much about like process and systems and what's going on. But then how are you showing up in the world, and having some way to ask, answer, and act. That's like my meta framework of frameworks, to ask certain questions, create an environment where people are likely to answer them honestly, or when I am asked, I'm answering them candidly, and then most importantly, acting on that new information, and then rinse, wash, and repeat. And in any business, understanding the frequency at which I need to check in. So those are kind of like very specific frameworks, but
by the way, that's a lot. I mean, it's probably so, you've been doing it for so long, but that's a lot that you just threw out there for folks to digest. Yeah. One thing you said that I think is super important, and it's, I would say one of the most important traits of every successful founder CEO we work with is self-awareness. And you said, I taught myself to be self-aware. How did you learn that? How did you learn that that was important? Are there things that you would advise folks to do to Because there's also people that say I'm super self-aware and they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. So one is if you have the gift or the skill of pattern recognition, my first piece of advice is apply it to yourself. So the way this showed up for me, so puzzles and patterns have been my thing since I was a kid.
Hmm.
And if not, you need to train yourself to look for patterns. And because one-offs are not going to help you, they could actually lead you astray. Patterns, right, are what matter. And I remember I was 19 years old and I traveled to Australia for my first ever new restaurant opening. And a couple things went wrong at that opening. And then about a few months later, I helped launch the franchise first ever in Central America, and very different team, different language, different franchise owner. And literally everything is different, yet a very similar set of things went wrong. And by the time I got to Argentina in South America, launching the franchise in that market, and the same shit went wrong.
Yeah.
It is so obvious that
Yeah.
I am the only common denominator. Like it's just screaming. You have to be blind. You have to be so engulfed in thinking you're amazing to not see that either I am directly the cause or directly the enabler, or there is something that only I have the ability to improve that I am not and so it was selfish. It was painful and embarrassing to go through the same thing again with a different team. And it's like, all right, no more. And so, but I didn't know the answer.
Right.
And with Hooters, it's not like we had Wharton MBAs beating down the door to come lead the company. We were like finding our way from the inside out. And so where do you look for the answers? The people doing the work. Nobody at the corporate office had ever done what I had been doing. And so they didn't have the answers. They're the ones who sent me with no playbook. And so I just started asking the employees, and there was this restaurant consultant that had a framework of asking employees about what was making their day difficult. So I used this MMDD log, made my day difficult. It was literally a clipboard in the restaurant. And before everybody left, they had to write what made their day difficult, one thing. And then it was my job to look for patterns, right? Number one, number two, most often mentioned thing, and fix it. And if I couldn't fix it, by the next day. If I couldn't fix it, have a conversation. What are we doing about it? Why is it not fixable? Or why do I disagree that it should be fixed? Because maybe I'm doing a bad job of explaining why it matters. So really, of course, I didn't know it then. I was a 19-year-old, like opening restaurants, slinging chicken wings. But what I was doing was mapping friction. Yeah. And then moving that friction to improve productivity. And as a result, building a culture where people believed their point of view mattered and that their work mattered. And instead of the MMDD log being the only way I could source this, people started just coming up real time. Hey, this is in the way. Let me show you. So
in particular, if they think you're going to do something about it, right?
Right.
I think that's the fault that's the mistake a lot of companies make, is they source all these great ideas and then they don't do anything with them.
Exactly.
People just get demoralized.
And then the conversation around why I'm not addressing everything on the list.
Yeah.
Because I can't. And so I'm looking for the things that matter most to most. And so this idea of the few things that matter and that are controllable, small enough to change, big enough to matter, right? It's in my control and it's prioritized. And so I'm acting on this. And maybe over time, the things in the first few days or first few weeks that were number 8, 9, or 10, after I clear 1, 2, and 3, maybe those do come up and we're able to get to those, or it might be something different. And the higher the complexity, the greater the degree of newness, the more frequently that question, what's making your day difficult, needs to be asked, answered, and acted on. When things are a little normalized, it could be what made your month difficult or what made your quarter difficult. And we use this in our company. It can be a Slack channel. It can be a clipboard if you're in a physical business. It can be an email list. The point is to ask the people doing the work, look for patterns, create a culture where people know it is safe and desired to speak the truth, organize it, share it, act on it, and keep doing that as a culture.
And back to the point about self-awareness, that also keeps you honest, right? Because people are telling you every day, hey, these are the things that you're not doing well.
And then over time, like different stores, different occasions, different teams, again, you use this pattern where it's like, okay, I don't want to just react to this in every place. There is something I can do to literally make that never show up on the list again.
Yeah.
Over time. And so it's like leveling up in a very strategic way.
One of the things that, when you're in a high growth company, you're going from 10 to 100 to 200 to 500 people, and it's hard. You're constantly looking to up level. You're trying to figure out which people to train and promote. And What advice or tips do you have for CEOs and founders that are going through that cycle? And a lot of the feedback, a lot of folks come to me and they're really frustrated. They made a bad hire, or somebody's not scaling, and I always have to kind of say, hey, that is the game. Like there is no company that just starts with 50 people and they all scale to 10 billion in revenue. And so the game that you're playing as a CEO, and you're trying to play well, is trying to figure out where to up level, trying to figure out which folks you've got to move out and bring in new talent. But what advice do you have, and in particular in a market like the one we're in right now, where we just came out of this crazy 2-year window for many reasons, and I think folks are taking stock of what they have. In many cases, some of our companies have had to do layoffs or rifts to kind of right size their team. Do you have any, I don't know, any Cat's 10 commandments on people and teams and leadership that you share, or even things that you share often with the founders and CEOs that you work with?
So many.
Right. That's a long list.
One is what you just said, which is reminding leaders that this is literally the job.
Right.
Literally the job. Properly resourcing your vision for the company, and asking the question, do we have what we need if I were to kind of resource the company today for where it is today? How would it stack up against what we have? And then with who we have, can some of them get there in the time that we need? That is a very important part of the question. And if not, and is that a fair assessment? And if not, how do I do something about it? And so here's where I will get very specific on, because I find leaders have these thoughts in their head. One, they're saying, shit, I'm new to this, so who am I to hold them to a higher standard, right? And I find so many leaders have the humility to ask that question, who am I to challenge you? But they do not have the courage to answer it. And the answer is, you are the CEO,
right?
Or you are the president. And if you don't do something about it, no one will. And you are actually failing the company, failing your customers, failing your existing teams, and failing that person if you don't ensure there is a right, like, leader job fit in the company. And you've got to reframe what failure is. Failure is not a tough conversation. Failure is not, oh man, I heard them 18 months ago or 2 years ago, and now I'm already talking about them. That's not failure, right? Sometimes it literally is the right thing to do, and failure is not doing something about it. So some liberating conversations. One is reminding you it's the job, and if you don't, no one else will. And often when you finally make these people changes, maybe it's a promotion, maybe it's narrowing someone's role, maybe it's putting them in a different role, and maybe it's saying goodbye, inevitably people in the company come out. Someone says, what took you so long? Or finally, or it's
that always happens.
and you're like, oh,
yeah.
Or other people start to leave, right? Because the standard you hold for your leadership trickles down to the level of expectation people believe is in place in the company. And doesn't matter how inspiring the founder is, if people aren't winning as a team and they're not feeling that they are able to contribute as individuals, they can love you all they want, they're still going to leave, because people care about who they work for. So just keep that in your mind. Like, remember, it's like your job. Then the other part is, okay, how do I have this conversation? Here is a version. I've used a version of that when I took over Focus Brands as president and COO of the company. Several of the presidents who were previously my peers, they were no longer the right fit. Several. And for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes the brands they were leading changed radically. And so their very strengths that were perfect for where the business was 3 years prior were now not for where the business was. And one case, someone had just been there a really unnaturally long time and had a very different mindset about, like, how to get things done. And our company had matured and gotten sophisticated, implemented systems, and this person no likey the systems, and so there's all kinds of reasons, but there is a respectful way. One, what I'm not talking about is house on fire, right? I'm not talking about a harassment situation, poor culture, like that needs to be surgical and immediate. And there is gentleness, like you just do it and get it done as quickly as you can, literally as quickly as you can. Hire very slowly, coach, counsel, and manage expectations, and lead by example. And then when you know it's not right, fire very quickly and with care. And so I'm not talking about those, but just a reminder there. These other conversations where it's like you were a fit and now you're not, which doesn't mean the person is regressed. It is just unnatural to expect any human to grow at the rate that some of these companies grow.
Right.
It is literally like violating space and time. A few people are athletes and can do it. Most,
not many.
not many.
It's
Even
hard.
the greatest of CEOs,
Yeah.
when the companies change in public markets, the boards come together and they're like, and I'm talking CEOs here, like mid-level leaders, like, hey, it's a different era. We have a fiduciary responsibility. It's time to have the next leader for the next season of life. And so none of us are immune. But think of this phrase. Imagine yourself having a version of this conversation, which again, it assumes you've had coaching and, all the right performance management stuff in place, and a good head of people to help you through that. Do not wait on that hire.
By the way, I could not, we don't have time to spend 30 minutes on that, but that alone is one of my, is one of my biggest things. I think as a CEO, particularly a first-time CEO, having a great head of people is
how do you
huge.
You would never know this stuff.
Yeah.
Without that partner or listening
Anyways,
to this.
I took you off track, but that point, you'd be amazed at the correlation between companies that we see that succeed through the growth phase and having a great leader in that role.
Yeah. And so imagine a version of this conversation, again, assuming you have good people counsel and you've done all the right things, is look, here's what the company needs to, here are your strengths. Here's what the company needs today. It's too great of a gap. It's unreasonable and unnatural for me to ask you to fill that gap in the time that we need. What is right for the team and the company is to have a leader that has these sets of capabilities and experiences. And I'm not kicking you to the curb today, but we need a new leader in this role in 90 to 120 days. And I want to work with you to architect that transition and then take really good care of people who have helped you get where you've gotten. And it's not hard. And half of the time people are relieved. The other half, they need to process and they deserve the honor of a moment, a minute, a few days to process, and then to co-architect if they can be good citizens. Sometimes they can't, but if they can be good citizens, what that transition looks like, what is the headline around it, how to honor them for the great contributions that they've had. And then at least in my case, when I've had these conversations, one of the reasons I'm having it this way, as soon as I know it, even if it results in someone being in seat for longer than is normal, knowing this in their mind, is I need to search under the bright light of day.
Right.
I need to use all the tools at my disposal in this crazy environment to find the fit. And I have to be secretive about it. It makes that job a lot harder. So not always the way it goes, but if that conversation starter even just moves you closer to comfort and courage in having the conversation, it will save you a lot of time and heartache.
What about the current, I'm older than most of the folks in our firm at this point, as are my partners. And so we're constantly trying to tell people, hey guys, this is a really crazy window in time. Like I've been around for a long time. There is a lot. We got a pandemic, we got a potential recession, we got the issues with Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of fuel on the fire right now. And so, I'm just curious how you process that as a CEO. You've been through a couple of different experiences prior to AG. What are you sharing with your team? What are you telling them about the macro around them? How are you being empathetic to their own emotions and their own psychology, the ups and downs? I'm just curious, any tips that you would share for other CEOs right now? I guess that, where that comes from is what I have found is a lot of CEOs have been in a mode of not talking a lot because they're trying to protect people. They don't want them to know that things are ugly in the financing market, or they don't want them to know that the company has issues, or they're trying to put them in this little cocoon. And I'm always like, hey guys, the best thing you can do, put it out there and tell people, hey, we're going to build a really resilient company. We're going to go through a lot of ups and downs along the way, but we're going to be open and honest with each other as we do it. That cocoon model just, to me, doesn't, and we were in an era where in 20 and 21, there were a lot of cocoons built, a lot of, you now see Facebook and Google notably coming out and saying, hey guys, we got a little soft. What are you seeing, and how, is there anything you're doing different in your leadership style?
Yeah. I mean, to your point, it is like layers of bananas.
That's a good way to put it.
And the world is heavier.
Yeah.
Than it's ever been, just like more connect and more awareness of what is heavy. And so first is just remembering that like everyone's human, you're human. Every initiative and headline around mental health, around giving people the space to question, to express is cannot be overstated culturally. Like you have to create that environment. I like to use the analogy, air out of the balloon, let the air out of the balloon. Otherwise, right. Next is structurally think of, I learned this term from one of the great consulting firms actually that I brought into one of my companies, and they use this term, sponsorship spine. And if you think of your organization, whether you do the traditional triangle of leadership on top and customers being the largest number at the bottom, or you do the inverted triangle, or however you like to view it, there is a group that is small, that is in a certain set of roles in the company. And then as you move out from that group, it's more people. So if you think about a sponsorship spine, because it scares leaders to talk about sensitive things that might not be overly positive, and have it get out of control, or have people over lean into the negative, certainly have it leaked right to the press or whatever. And so using the technique of a sponsorship spine, which means ELT, like C-suite ELT, you've got to have these conversations constantly, like nothing is off the board. Then saying,
so for you, is that weekly? I mean, are you having,
weekly.
Yeah. Okay.
Weekly. Then from this point, your executive, your broader leaders of leaders. So for us, that's VPs and above. We've gotten big enough to have some meat at that level. Some companies could be heads of, like whatever you have. And at least monthly, you have a 90-minute session. We're fully virtual. We've never had a headquarters. We come together physically as an executive, as a C-suite every month. We talk every week. We're coming physically together every month. We have longer versions every quarter. We're now bringing in that VP and above to tag on to that at a certain frequency, a couple times a year. Again, global, never had a headquarters ever. That cadence is incredibly important. But then this idea of the tough things, the hairy conversations, once a month in that 90-minute session with leaders of leaders, you're giving broader updates to ensure cross-functional communication, but then talk about this stuff, macro environment. How does it affect us specifically? How might it affect you? And then lots of time for the questions to come. Slow down, give the space for people to just pause and ask and wonder, and full psychological safety for that. And then a few notes come out of that of things that now go to a small set of people in maybe the manager group or director group, and you get their feedback. And certainly what you've done is you're kind of bouncing into the organization and then back up to, company level messaging. And you're going down to build this sponsorship spine of not only advocates, of people who can, when you're not in the room, when you're not on the Zoom, are the ones kind of reinforcing the accurate message. Right. But you're also making your messaging more relevant to a broader audience. So when you do have a company-wide Zoom or a company-wide post, it really hits. And if you cocoon, remember, in the absence of alternative information, people come to their own conclusions. Right. And you don't think they know, they think they know. And whether they know what's going on or they're playing tapes in their head from the media and making assumptions about how it applies to your company correctly or incorrectly, that is far more dangerous in a company than just saying, here's what we're like. Here's one of my favorite ways to say something you may not know the answer. A lot of leaders say, well, I don't know the answer. I don't know what to tell them. I stand up in front of a group and say, this is a question I have right now. This is a question we're asking. This is something we're wrestling with. We'd love to know your questions. I want you to know it's on our mind. And we're going to come back and have deeper discussions about what it means for us. Sometimes that's all you can say, but at least you're not hiding something. Then as soon as you have something you can say, you do. And then at least you're controlling the narrative.
Yeah. And I love we have a question, because it implies, A, you don't have the answer. B, it also lets them know it's okay to have questions in their division, their function, their strategy, et cetera. I mean, I could do this for hours, but I also want to be respectful of your time. Let me close with, how much fun are you having at AG? Tell everybody just a little bit. I won't spoil it. Yeah.
It's so great. I mean, it's crazy. I really hope me leaning into this role inspires other people from more mature companies to lean into growth stage. because it is scale, it is impact, but then the hypergrowth, like still, growing at hundreds of % year over year on hundreds of millions in annual sales.
Crazy.
Super fun. The company had 50 employees just over a year ago, and
Wow.
we're pushing on 200 now, and we needed a growth spurt to catch up. It's modulating now. Obviously, we'll probably never have a growth spurt like that again, relative, as a percentage or multiples on the base. And now it's just making the most of those capabilities, everything we've talked about. Some leaders scale, others need to be in different roles or are a better fit for another company that's at a different stage. We're attracting.
By the way, on that note, I would say, just for folks, you've been great about introducing some of your team who are going to move on to me to introduce to our companies. And I always think that's such a great hallmark of a confident leader, is they can say to somebody, hey, this isn't a fit for you, but let me make a few introductions for you that might be valuable to you. And it just, man, it goes so far. And those folks, by the way, when I talk to them, they're confident, right? They're just sort of like, hey, I got it to here and I'm not the right, but man, I'm ready to go do it again. So I love the way you do that. And it's obviously, it's great for us because I get to make intros for those folks, but I can tell that they really value the way you approach those conversations.
Yeah, it's a privilege, right? When you approach leadership, like, I'm so glad it's me having this conversation, because I know I will handle it with care, but urgency, with what's right for the company and the person. And then to get to do that in truly like nutrition and wellness and a mission-driven company, like it's really so special. And to be on the precipice of continued global expansion and product innovation, it's just so special. I feel
cool.
really fortunate, and to be in deep partnership with the founder CEO, right? That is very, very special, to elevate what is magic about the founder DNA and allow a founder and CEO support them and stepping into their genius, pushing the company forward, and have them spending their time on things that only they can do at a certain level. And then doing that throughout the organization, yet at the same time, like, professionalizing at a rate the company can handle, but not so fast that we like diminish our entrepreneurial magic. It's so special and so fun. And the upside is like literally unlimited for us. So
Awesome.
It's the real deal.
I think it's super cool. And I've said for a very long time that the most fun is to run or work for a mission-driven company, right? If you really believe, and I think we're seeing that right now, people in the market are shifting from maybe things they didn't care that much about to saying, hey, I really want to work. If I'm going to make the same amount of money and life's going to be chaotic around me, I'd love to do it for a company that I care about. And I remember when you and I were talking about, you were thinking about taking this role and you were really focused on the mission of the company. And it's going to be fun to see what you do with it. So thanks for spending time, Kat. And I always appreciate talking to you. And then I love all the things that you're doing for founders and CEOs out there, and keep it up. And we appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.